Hey guys! Tonight we drift gently along one of India's most enchanting and least understood rivers, the Narmada. It's night on the riverbank, and the soft chirp of crickets hums beneath the rustling of palm fronds. A light wind stirs the dust of an old path where pilgrims have walked barefoot for centuries. The stars above glisten like polished glass beads, and the moon lays a silver stripe right across the water's calm surface. You breathe in the humid air, part incense, part wood smoke, part mango tree, and you can already feel your shoulders relax. But don't get too cozy. This is the kind of river that flows backwards, divides languages, lifts temples, and drowns entire towns. Also, it hosts crocodiles the length of your mum's minivan. So, yeah, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love hearing how far this sleepy journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk at the edge of Amarkantak, a hill town nestled at the confluence of ancient forests and mountain springs. This is the river's birthplace, high in the Maikal Hills of Madhya Pradesh. It doesn't look like much at first, just a trickle, emerging from a sacred stone pool that's barely wider than a bathtub. But from here, the Narmada will carve a westward path, unlike almost every other major river in India. Most flow east to the Bay of Bengal, but not her. She's stubborn, a little wild and totally unique. You hear it from the locals again and again. She is not just a river, she is a goddess. They call her Rewa, one of the daughters of Shiva, and according to legend the Narmada was born from the sweat of the god during intense meditation. That's one way to make an entrance. As you follow her early bends, the terrain changes fast. Steep ridges break open into wide, leafy valleys. Bamboo clumps sway beside terraced farms. Occasionally you pass shrines painted in marigold and turmeric yellow. No two are the same. One has a coconut balanced on a sword. Another has a painted tiger standing guard. These tiny shrines are guideposts for those doing the parikrama, a full circumambulation of the river, often taking years on foot. Yes, years. Try explaining that one to your Apple Watch. The Narmada is different in more than direction. She marks a border. To her north lie the Gangetic Plains, flat, fertile, and speaking mostly Hindi and Urdu. South of her are the Deccan Plateau lands, rockier, older, dotted with languages like Marathi, Telugu, and tribal tongues you won't find on Duolingo. This isn't just a north-south divide, it's a cultural rift, geological fault, and spiritual threshold, all wrapped in a long ribbon of moving water. It's a strange thing, watching a river draw a line between realities. Even the way people refer to the river shifts depending on which side you're on. On one bank, she's Ma Narmada. On the other, she's Rewa Devi. And in both, she's worshipped not just near the water, but as the water. That's right, every drop is sacred. Which is probably why, according to some old locals, she never allows her fish to be caught easily. If the fish are missing, one wrinkled man told you with a wink, it's because they swam into another dimension. Historians still argue whether the early worship of the Narmada predates Vedic rituals or developed alongside them. What is clear is that the river features in Sanskrit epics and regional poetry stretching back at least 2,000 years. Unlike the Ganga or Yamuna, she doesn't play second fiddle. She is the main act in this part of India, and has been for a very, very long time. Just before your eyes close for a moment too long, you spot an old bridge, its stone pillars partly submerged, and realise it's probably Roman age in age, only it was built by tribal hands. There's moss on every joint, and an egret perches atop one broken span. You wonder how many stories that bridge has watched walk across it. Kings, monks, refugees, time travellers disguised as backpackers. Here, at the very start of the river, the air is thick with paradox. Stillness hums with movement. The ancient feels futuristic. The divine shares space with the debris of plastic water bottles. And somehow, through all of this, the river keeps flowing west. Backwards, maybe, but never wrong. You follow the river as it begins its unusual journey. not toward the rising sun like so many of its cousins, but against the grain westward, carving its own quiet rebellion across the land. The Narmada flows in defiance of India's dominant river trend, slipping out of the highlands and making her way toward the Arabian Sea instead of the Bay of Bengal. It's a detail that seems innocent until you really think about it. The subcontinent tilts eastward. Most rivers, like the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Mahanadi, tumble joyfully toward the east coast. But the Narmada, along with a couple of lesser-known friends like the Tapti and Mahi, shrugs off that inclination. She doesn't care about gravity's peer pressure. She has her own topography. Scientists say it's because of the rift valley she flows through, a massive sunken corridor formed millions of years ago during one of the Earth's more dramatic oops moments. This geological depression gave the river a trench to glide through, a trench that slopes gently west. You imagine the river rolling her eyes at the rest of the country's rivers and muttering, "You go your way, I'll go mine." As you descend into the deeper part of the river's early stretch, the landscape opens like a book. Forests recede slightly, replaced by vast plateaus and basalt cliffs. You hear the call of a langur echo from one side to the other. The sound takes longer to return. That's how wide the gap becomes, like the earth cracked open just for her. This trench, known as the Narmada Graben, is no small thing. It's a major tectonic feature, one of the clearest signs of ancient faulting in India. You're literally walking through a scar on the planet's crust. Romantic, right? Nothing says relaxation like crustal dislocation. Even stranger, geologists have found marine fossils embedded in the rocks far above the river. Fossils of fish in what is now high, dry land. Historians still argue whether these remnants are from a time when the Arabian Sea reached farther inland, or whether these hills were once under shallow, prehistoric oceans. Either way, you're not the first living thing to stare at this sky and wonder how you got here. The Narmada's early path winds past rock formations that glow a dull orange in the moonlight. Jagged but graceful, these volcanic shapes are remnants of the Deccan traps, layer after layer of lava flows that once smothered half of India. Think of it like the planet having a really bad breakup and crying magma for a few thousand years. You notice how quiet the river feels here. There are no motors, no horns, no laughing children skipping stones. Just wind, water, and the occasional flutter of a firefly in your peripheral vision. You begin to feel the spell of the geography working on you. Even your thoughts begin to flow more slowly, curling around obstacles like the river curves around boulders. Some say the Narmada is older than the Himalayas. Others claim her path follows a pre-human fault line, like she knew where to go before we ever tried to tell her. And here's the kicker. She doesn't flood like the Ganges does. She stays mostly in her lane. Calm, contained, methodical. But beneath that surface is power. A quiet, crushing force moving earth, soul and story forward, one muddy kilometre at a time. You pass a small village where the houses are built close to the riverbank, as if each one wants to catch a glimpse of her before bed. Lamps flicker behind blue painted windows. A thin trail of wood smoke dances upward and disappears into the stars. Down by the steps, or ghats, a few women in bright saris are still lighting floating candles in little leaf bowls. They whisper blessings, some for ancestors, some for unborn children. You crouch beside one of the bowls as it drifts past. Inside is a single marigold flower and a tiny lamp flickering like a heartbeat. It's beautiful, sure, but also biodegradable. The Narmada inspires that kind of reverence. Even the trash is sacred, or at least compostable. Then just as you think you've grasped the rhythm of the place, a man riding a battered scooter swerves past you and yells, "River's flooding upstream!" Which sounds insane, but you nod politely, because here things like that just happen. There are still maps used by local boatmen that show currents shifting direction in certain seasons. Some blame moon phases, others say it's the gods, recharging their powers. Science has some vague explanation involving monsoons and reverse eddies, but nobody really likes that answer. And you don't need a neat answer. You just keep walking, letting the river whisper her backwards lullaby, winding westward like a silver serpent, coiling through the land and, somehow, through your mind too. The longer you walk beside the Narmada, the more you begin to feel her contradictions. On one hand, she is a place of worship, sacred beyond comprehension. On the other, she is the subject of endless debates, legal, environmental, and social. The devotion to the river is deep, but the peace you'd expect from such reverence is, well, not always floating gently downstream. You pass through a small city, probably Jabalpur, where the river cuts right through the bustle. Here the Narmada isn't a quiet, meditative stream. She's vibrant, humming, unpredictable. Boats loaded with bananas and oil drums drift past temples blasting bhajans over tinny speakers. A wedding procession drums past in a blur of marigolds and bass beats. While just yards away, a group of sadhu monks sits cross-legged in trance. It's like watching a rave, a pilgrimage, and a traffic jam all happen at the same time. And somehow this chaos has a centre. The river. She doesn't seem to mind. At the Ghats, women dip into the river 3 times before sunrise. Not for hygiene, but for rebirth. Children play, splashing holy water in each other's faces, because spiritual enlightenment can wait until after tag. Cows wander into the shallows and just stand there, like mid-sized sacred driftwood. You know the scene should feel surreal, but it just feels normal. You pass a priest brushing his teeth with a neem twig, while simultaneously arguing with a man over a floating coconut that went missing. "It was my offering," the man insists. "Then maybe she didn't want it," the priest replies with a shrug and spits dramatically into the water. Sacred, but not above pettiness. Despite its holiness, the Narmada has been a site of bitter conflict. The river has sparked lawsuits, protests and movements like the Narmada Bachao Andolan, a decades-long resistance against damming and displacement. Historians still argue whether the benefits of these projects, like electricity and irrigation, justify the massive uprooting of communities and flooding of sacred sites. It's one of those topics where every answer is uncomfortable, and yet pilgrimages continue. Devotees still line up to touch the water, to carry a little home in copper jars. Some even sprinkle it over their entire houses like spiritual Febreze. You remember a shrine you passed hours ago, barely more than a stone slab with a trident stuck in it. Someone had placed a plastic bottle filled with river water next to it. On the bottle was a label, "Purified Himalayan Spring." You almost laugh. Even gods apparently accept rebranding. The river itself is called alive in legal and religious texts. Yes, legally. In 2017, a court in India tried to grant the Narmada the status of a living person. The idea was to give her the same rights as a human being. Protection, dignity, the whole legal shebang. The move didn't stick for long, but it sent a message. This river isn't just water. She's a being, a citizen, a moody auntie with opinions even. One such opinion. She doesn't appreciate disrespect. Ask anyone living along her shores about the time the government tried to dredge her banks near a holy site. Machines broke. Workers reported strange dreams. A bulldozer sank, slowly without resistance, into the mud. She ate it, one man told you, completely serious, like a snack. And then there's the legend of the invisible bridge. Somewhere, locals say, there's a stretch of river that can only be crossed by the truly pure of heart. If you're worthy, stones will rise beneath your feet. If not, well, hopefully someone remembered to bring a rope. These stories aren't always whispered in reverence. Sometimes they're told with a smile, over tea, with someone raising an eyebrow like, "You get it, right?" You know she's not just a river. And by now, maybe you do get it. You start to feel her personality, not just her shape or direction, but her moods. One day she's full of children, noise and mango peels. The next, she's silent and murky, pulling mist over her shoulders like a shawl. You step onto a barge, a wide, flat raft of stitched-together logs, and float across a lazy curve in the river. An old man guides it using a bamboo pole, barely glancing at the current. "She's calm now," he murmurs. "She remembers when you're kind." His words hang in the air. You think back to the offerings, the lawsuits, the weddings, the stolen coconuts. Sacred, but not peaceful, not simple, not tame. The Narmada is many things, but never just one thing. She divides realities not with force, but with fluid grace. And like any powerful woman, she resists being pinned down. By the time you reach the next stretch of river, the ground beneath your feet feels off. Not soft, not hard. It's something in between, a slow, steady give, like the earth is thinking about whether to hold you or let you drop. That's when you remember you're walking through a rift valley, not just near one, inside it. This is the Narmada Graben, one of India's most fascinating geological features, a deep trough between two towering faults. If India were a book, this would be one of its deepest creases. This valley was born from tectonic tantrums. Millions of years ago, during the breakup of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, the land split. Plates pulled away from each other, cracking the crust like a dried-out mango. The western side sank while the eastern side held firm. The result? A trench that cradles the river like a sleeping child, and the ground still moves. Not dramatically. This isn't Hollywood earthquake territory. But tremors occasionally rattle the temples that line the banks. Stone bells tinkle when no one's pulled the rope. Offerings slide a few centimetres overnight. It's subtle, but it's constant. Geologists call it intraplate seismicity. Locals call it the goddess breathing in her sleep. You pass by a cliff wall pockmarked with tiny caves. Some are empty, others hold statues, candles, or marigold garlands slowly withering in the heat. You duck into one and find a painted footprint on the stone floor. A local legend says it belongs to Shiva. Another says it's from a wandering yogi who never touched the ground again after his final step into enlightenment. "Pick your myth," says a man outside, casually chewing betel leaf. They all end in the sky. Historians still argue whether these cave temples originated in the early Buddhist period or came later under Shaivite influence. The problem is, nobody really wrote things down. Carvings fade, scripts evolve, and the stone doesn't exactly tweet. So instead, knowledge lives in stories, handed down from grandmother to grandchild, sometimes changing shape like the river itself. Here, the rift doesn't just split the land. It also divides two types of time. There's geological time, the eons it took to shape this valley. And then there's sacred time, a kind of spiralling, ever-present now, where Shiva might walk in at any moment and ask for chai. You feel the heaviness of both as you rest on a rock ledge overlooking the water. Below, the river glides without effort. You try to trace its surface with your eyes, but it keeps bending away, slipping through curtains of mist and hanging tree limbs. It's like chasing a dream you only half remember. Suddenly, a flash of silver breaks the water. A fish, or maybe a trick of the light. But nearby, a stone marker warns, "No fishing beyond this point. Respect sacred flow." You think of the fish in the previous village, the ones that swim into other dimensions. Maybe this is where they land. You find yourself whispering out loud, "How can a crack in the earth feel more whole than the cities I've lived in?" No one answers, but the river murmurs something in return. A splash, a ripple, a soft gulp of current under a sunken log. You pretend you understand. That's half the game here anyway. Farther along, you come upon a field of strangely balanced boulders. They're stacked like cairns, some naturally, others clearly adjusted by human hands. A local girl sits cross-legged nearby, carefully placing stones on top of each other. "For balance," she says simply. "What happens if you knock one down?" you ask. She smiles. Then you start again. One boulder nearby is blackened at the top, smooth as glass. It's a type of basalt called columnar lava, formed when molten rock cools slowly and cracks into geometric patterns. You run your hand over it. It feels cold. Ancient, firm, but somehow soft under the skin. You can see why people worshipped rocks here long before they had names for gods. The girl's grandmother walks by and explains that the rocks shift ever so slightly each year. "The land remembers the ocean," she says, nodding toward the west. "It wants to go back." Whether she means geologically or spiritually, you're not sure. Either way, you believe her. Not far from here, a modern survey team once tried to measure the depth of the rift. Their instruments failed, multiple times. They blamed calibration, the villagers blamed arrogance. "You don't measure the goddess," someone had muttered at them. You ask. And the asking happens every day, in bells, in chants, in water poured from copper pots. The earth may be split, the river may flow backward, and reality may feel thin here, but somehow it holds. You keep walking, lighter than before, as if your steps aren't quite touching the ground. You cross to the southern bank near a place where the river narrows just enough to suggest a crossing, though, in truth, it's more a suggestion than an invitation. The ferry is a creaky wooden raft with room for maybe 10 people if everyone breathes in. A man with a pink turban and a perfect moustache rows it with a rhythm that suggests he's been doing this since before GPS was a thing. And then you're on the other side. Same river, different world. Immediately the ground feels drier. Dust clings to your shoes in a different way. The air even smells warmer, spicier. A roadside stall sells roasted peanuts and jaggery in little paper cones, and you notice the accent of the vendor has shifted. The Hindi here is wrapped in Marathi curls, and behind it, a chorus of tribal languages buzzes like cicadas in the fields. This is one of the quiet truths of the Narmada. The two banks live very different lives. The river doesn't just divide land, it divides culture. North of the river, the land is flatter, more agriculturally intensive, with rows of wheat and sugarcane and a more homogenized rhythm. South of the river, things feel older, wilder. The hills are closer, the soil redder, the gods slightly less forgiving. Historians still argue whether this divide is a legacy of the ancient Vindhya range, which once marked the southern limit of Aryan migration, or if the river itself simply became a cultural membrane that filtered ideas rather than mixing them. What's certain is that even centuries ago, poets and sages noticed the contrast. In Kalidasa's plays, characters often speak of crossing the Narmada, as if it were not just a physical journey, but a crossing into another dimension. You don't just travel south, you go into the forest, into mystery, into the unknown. And that vibe persists today. You pass a field where a woman is harvesting millet with a curved sickle. A nearby child is playing with a bundle of clay figurines. Tiny bulls, a farmer, a tree god. These aren't toys. They're offerings, miniature prayers. Then, just down the road, you stumble into an entirely different kind of ceremony. Loudspeakers blast modern bhajans over a crowd of dancers spinning in dust clouds, throwing coloured rice into the air. One man hands you a banana and says, "You look like you could use more potassium." And honestly, he's not wrong. Here, religion isn't static, it dances. Literally. A group of Bega tribespeople invite you to their evening fire. They wear shells and beads, not for decoration, but as coded stories. Every necklace a history book, every tattoo a map. You sit cross-legged while an elder tells you how their ancestors used to follow the river's bends, not to farm or bathe, but to dream. They believed certain parts of the river had sleeping spirits. You don't fish there, he says, unless you want to pull up more than a fish. One of the children hands you a leaf. On it is a tiny line of ants walking in perfect single file. "That's the river," she says in a whisper. "Even the ants know which side they're on." You smile, half jokingly asking, "Which side is better?" She shrugs. "Depends on what you're carrying." A simple answer, but it lingers. You keep walking through the southern bank's changing terrain, small hills now creeping into view, patches of forest reclaiming farmland. Even the music changes. Temple bells fade into flute melodies played by cowherds in the distance, and instead of paved roads you find yourself on narrow paths, trodden by generations of bare feet. It's not just culture that changes across the river, it's also agriculture. On the northern bank, wheat dominates, sugarcane too. On the southern, it's more lentils, millets, and forest produce, like mahua flowers, tamarind and wild honey. The economy here runs on different ingredients, different rituals, different priorities. And the animals know it too. A herd of goats wanders by, unhurried. Then a monkey screeches from a sal tree and startles a nearby farmer, who simply mutters, he thinks he owns the place. You're not sure if he means the monkey or the god it represents. Either fits. As dusk falls, the difference becomes starker. The southern bank doesn't glow with the same electricity lines and sodium lights as the north. It dims naturally, like someone turning down the contrast on your whole evening. Campfires flicker, crickets begin their chorus, and the river glistens with the quiet knowing of a creature that has seen both sides and refuses to pick one. You settle under a neem tree, the bark rough against your back, and feel the hush descend. Two realities, one river, and you, drifting between them like a leaf that hasn't decided where to land. You wake at dawn to the creaking of wood and a splash that sounds far too large to be a fish. Half opening one eye, you spot a boatman coaxing his raft toward a thin rope tied to both banks. His craft looks like it was built from spare doors and optimism, but it floats, mostly. You stretch, yawn, and return to the path, because today's walk will show you one of the river's strangest truths: how hard it is to cross. You would think, given the length and historical significance of the Narmada, that it would be laced with bridges, but no. Despite running for over 1,300 kilometres, the river has relatively few crossings. Especially in its middle stretches, the ones rich with temples and tribal stories, bridges are either absent or strangely temporary. Seasonal pontoons, rope and drum contraptions, or local boats that work when they feel like it. Why so few? The reasons range from terrain to politics to a quiet resistance against modernisation. The valley is deep in places. Steep banks carved by eons of flowing water make bridge building a nightmare for engineers. In others, the spiritual status of the river discourages permanent intrusions. You don't pierce the skin of a goddess with rebar unless you really have to. Some say the river herself resists being crossed. One tale tells of a British engineer who tried to build a massive stone bridge during the Raj. It collapsed 3 times. The river flooded mysteriously every time construction resumed. Locals warned him she wasn't ready. He ignored them. The final version stood for a month, then sank during a clear, cloudless night. "The goddess doesn't want your shortcuts," an old sadhu had muttered as he watched the last stone vanish. You reach a village where the only way across is a manually pulled ferry, a flat wooden platform with a rope pulley system. It glides across with the help of 2 young boys who chat as they haul the thick cord. "Ever think about installing an engine?" you ask. They look horrified. "And ruin the peace," one says. The other adds, "Also fuel costs. YouTube money won't cover that." Fair. A few kilometres later, you come across the remains of a failed bridge project. Pillars standing like ancient molars in the river's mouth, wires drooping between them like forgotten shoelaces. A dog sits on one of the abandoned approach roads, yawning dramatically, as if to say, "We told you this wouldn't work." Historians still argue whether this reluctance to build bridges stems from the sacredness of the river or the sheer impracticality of its terrain. Either way, crossing becomes a ritual, a decision, a little leap of faith. Even when bridges do exist, modern ones made of concrete and steel, they feel like temporary guests. The wind howls louder on them. The river looks wider from their heights. You don't linger. No one does. You pass a group of women carrying bundles of firewood on their heads. One of them smiles and says, "You cross too many times, you forget where you started." You nod, thinking it's a metaphor, then realise she's being quite literal. Some pilgrims get so wrapped in the parikrama, the sacred walk around the river, that they lose track of which bank they're supposed to be on. It's like spiritual jet lag. The parikrama has rules, of course. You must walk clockwise around the river. Always keep it on your right. No shortcuts, no riding vehicles unless absolutely necessary. You stop at temples, you listen to the river's moods, and when you reach a point where a bridge would be convenient, you wait for a boat, or you wade, carefully, and every time you cross, it feels like more than logistics. It feels like a crossing between versions of yourself. There's a Sanskrit phrase you remember from a painted sign earlier. Narmada snanam punyam bhavati. Bathing in the Narmada brings virtue. But perhaps even more sacred than bathing is simply being with her, following her contours, honouring her twists, accepting that she may not always want to be convenient. You reach a quiet stretch where 2 trees arch over the water, their branches nearly touching. It's the closest thing to a natural bridge you've seen all day. Birds hop from one branch to the other like feathered messengers. You watch for a long while, feeling the simplicity of that moment settle in your bones. On the far bank you see someone lighting a lamp. On this side someone is feeding crows. Two acts of faith mirrored perfectly. No bridge between them, just the river. And somehow, that's enough. You've been following the river for days now, maybe weeks, depending on your pacing and how many times you've stopped to ask cows for directions. And now, the rhythm of your walk shifts. There's a subtle difference in the air, in the dust on your sandals. You've entered the Parikrama path proper, the great pilgrimage walk that follows the entire loop of the Narmada River. No, not just one side, the whole thing. It's called the Narmada Parikrama, and it's one of the only river pilgrimages in India where devotees are expected to walk along both banks. You begin on one side, walk to the mouth of the river at the Arabian Sea, then cross and walk all the way back on the opposite bank, keeping the river to your right the entire way. It's not a metaphor, it's a loop, a living labyrinth. You pass your first official Parikramavasi, a barefoot man in white cotton robes carrying nothing but a copper pot and a bundle wrapped in cloth. He nods at you solemnly. Only 2,100 kilometers to go, he says, and keeps walking. You blink. Did he say 2,100? Yep. The Parikrama is roughly 2,600 kilometers depending on your route. That's more than 1,600 miles. People spend months, sometimes over a year, walking it. And no, there's no app for it. No package tour, no comfy hotels. Just faith blisters and the occasional goat blocking the path. You stop at a rest hut, run by local villagers who offer dal and roti to weary travellers. On the wall is a painted map of the river's path, surrounded by tiny pictures of temples and saints. A small plaque reads, "Do not calculate in kilometres, calculate in karma." The joke lands gently. The Parikrama is open to everyone, men, women, young, old, the deeply spiritual and the mildly curious. But the rules are strict. You must not leave the path. You must not cross the river until you reach the sea. You must not ride in vehicles unless absolutely necessary. And you must walk in pradakshina, a clockwise direction with the river always on your right. Historians still argue whether the practice began in the medieval period or even earlier. Some say it was inspired by the natural reverence for the Narmada. Others trace it to Shaivite sects or tribal traditions. But the walk itself? Timeless. No one owns it. No one sells tickets. It exists simply because people keep walking. And what you see along the way? It's not just temples and trees, it's the subtle geography of devotion. In one village, women gather by the river to chant while washing brass pots in unison. In another, a boy sells tea under a banyan tree, swearing his great-grandfather served the same chai to pilgrims 100 years ago. And in between there are hours, sometimes entire days, of silence. Just the sound of your own breath and the river gliding beside you like a sleepy sacred shadow. You pass shrines carved into cliffs, temples built at impossible angles, and once a small tree with hundreds of bangles hanging from its branches. For the goddess to wear on festival days, a woman explains. You wonder how many wrists went bare for that offering. At one bend in the river, a sign warns you not to bathe. Not because of crocodiles this time, but because this particular curve is said to hold the memories of all those who failed to complete the Parikrama. According to belief, their footsteps still echo here. You listen. Do you hear them? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks again. The path isn't always scenic. Sometimes it takes you through rocky dust fields, industrial patches, or dry, cracked plains where the sun feels personal. But the people you meet, farmers, mendicants, chai vendors, grandmothers with fierce eyes, make the path sacred even when the view doesn't cooperate. And then, just when you think your legs can't go any farther, you find a spot where the river opens up into a perfect shimmering mirror. Not a ripple, not a sound, just sky, water, and a moment so still it might break if you breathe too hard. You sit down without meaning to. Your body knows. This is a pause, a gift, a soft comma in a very long sentence. The stars begin to appear one by one, then all at once. You realise you're sitting on one of the oldest pilgrimage paths in the world, not marked by flags or fences, but by stories, steps, and the quiet agreement between generations that this river deserves to be circled like a fire, not just crossed like a road. You lie back and watch the sky ripple with the water. You can't tell where one ends and the other begins, and maybe that's the point. Night deepens as you walk further along the Narmada's serpentine edge. A pale moon floats above the river like an ornament hanging from a thread, and the water reflects it with perfect clarity until something disturbs the surface. A ripple, a flicker, maybe a fish, or maybe something older, something watching. This stretch of the river is known less for temples and more for whispers. Ghosts, curses, and river spirits. That's the reputation around here. Every step you take feels like it might trigger a story. You feel it in the air, which hangs heavier. The silence feels full. You meet an old woman sitting cross-legged near the water, her face lit by a single oil lamp. She's placing small balls of rice and ghee on banana leaves. "For the spirits," she says. "Some hungry, some just lonely." She doesn't look up as she talks. She doesn't need to. Whatever she's feeding, it's already listening. Locals will tell you the Narmada is home to more than just fish and crocodiles. They'll tell you about Jaldevtas, water deities who take many forms. Some protect the river, others punish. There's a tale of a man who tried to bottle her water and sell it abroad. Every bottle shattered before shipment. Another of a woman who cursed the river during a drought and was found floating peacefully on a stretch of water too shallow for drowning. Historians still argue whether these ghost stories are remnants of ancient animist traditions or simply metaphors for respecting nature. Either way, people believe, and that belief shapes the geography as surely as erosion. You enter a grove of mango trees, twisted and gnarled, with roots like claws gripping the earth. This is Butvan, spirit land. Even the monkeys stay away. A child once wandered in and came out with a white streak in her hair and no memory of her name for 3 days. That's the story, at least. The ground beneath your feet suddenly shifts, an uneven patch of stone, slabs arranged in a spiral. It's a memorial, someone tells you, a shrine for the river's moods. Each stone is carved with a symbol: fish, flame, lightning, wind. A kind of language only the Narmada understands. You sit for a moment at the edge of the spiral, trying not to imagine what you're stepping into. But then an owl hoots from above and something in you relaxes. You're not in danger. You're just being observed, like the river is trying to decide who you are. Later, you pass a village where a strange festival is underway. Not a loud, firework-filled one. This one is quiet. People wear black. They chant in near whispers. A clay statue of a crocodile is carried down to the river and gently lowered into the water, followed by dozens of floating candles. A young man explains, "It's for those the river kept." He doesn't say lost, he says kept. You ask how many that is. He shrugs. You don't count the ones the goddess claims. The river spirits aren't all angry, though. In some villages, the Narmada is said to grant wishes, but only if asked correctly. One woman tells you that you must whisper your wish into a neem leaf and float it down the current without watching it go. She hates to be watched, the woman says, smiling. She's shy. Of course, there are skeptics. A few younger locals roll their eyes at the ghost stories, insisting it's all just fog and old age. One points to a glowing light on the opposite bank and says, "That's not a spirit, it's Mukesh with his motorbike." But even they don't step too close to the water after dark. You camp under a peepal tree whose roots hang down like ropes from another realm. In the quiet, the sounds become magnified. The river's gurgle, a distant drumbeat, the occasional laugh from someone who isn't there. And yet, you're not afraid. You're curious. If ghosts exist anywhere, this would be the place. A river that divides realities must have room for a few spirits, right? And maybe, just maybe, the real ghost is you, a lone walker drifting through a story too old to belong to you, yet somehow welcoming you anyway. The air changes long before the landscape does. It grows heavier, thicker, as if the molecules are clustering together, whispering secrets just out of earshot. And then you see it, an immense wall of concrete cutting across the river like a scar, the Sardar Saravar Dam. It rises like a fortress out of the water, imposing, humming, undeniable. For days you've walked through wilderness and whispers, where stories guided feet and gods shaped paths. Now, you're standing in front of the modern world's answer to sacred geography: control. The Sardar Sarovar is one of India's most ambitious and controversial infrastructure projects. It's part of the Narmada Valley Development Plan, designed to provide drinking water, electricity, and irrigation to millions. The idea: tame the river, make her useful. And tame her they did, at least on paper. You climb a small ridge for a better view and spot the massive reservoir behind the dam, an inland ocean stretching to the horizon, swallowing what was once villages, forests, and temples. There's a strange stillness here, not the silence of peace, but the hush of something lost. The kind of quiet you hear after the last song ends and the lights come on. Historians still argue whether the dam has saved more lives than it disrupted. On one hand, it's brought water to drought-prone regions. On the other, it's displaced over 250,000 people. Entire communities, especially tribal villages, were relocated, resettled, or simply erased. You pass a mural on a wall nearby. It shows a woman waist-deep in floodwater, holding a clay pot above her head, eyes closed, mouth open in silent prayer. Underneath is a single line: development is when the river forgets your name. And you realize that's what's happened here. The river you've been walking alongside, the one that whispers and shifts and grumbles, is quiet now, caught, flattened, transformed into stillness by turbines and policy. There's a visitors' centre near the dam, interactive models, glossy brochures, videos with triumphant music and animated farmers waving at canals. A guide explains how the project will revolutionize regional equity. His words flow smooth like water through a well-greased pipe. But outside, under a neem tree, you meet an old man who used to live where the reservoir now lies. He gestures toward the water with a cracked walking stick and says, "That used to be my school. There was a banyan tree next to it. Monkeys lived there." He pauses. "Now, they give me 4 kilos of rice and a concrete house. But no tree, no river sound, no monkeys." You sit with him a while. He doesn't ask you anything. Doesn't tell you to go or stay. He just shares the silence like it's tea. Later you visit a cluster of resettlement homes, identical boxes lined up like checkers on a board. No carvings, no cows, no shrines tucked into courtyard walls. "These aren't homes," one woman tells you. "These are storage units for people." But the river doesn't care. She keeps flowing. You reach a stretch known by locals as Magamach Ghat, crocodile crossing. The name isn't poetic, it's a warning. This part of the river is home to the mugger crocodile, a broad-snouted reptile that's been swimming these waters since before humans figured out fire. You're told not to get too close to the edge. "She's fast when she wants to be," one man says, though you're not sure if he's talking about the croc or the river. You spot one, half submerged, eyes like polished stones. It looks bored. That's somehow more threatening than if it looked hungry. You step back. Still, the crocodiles are part of the river's law. They're sacred in their own right. In some temples, they're even fed offerings during certain festivals. Historians still argue whether these traditions began as ritual or simply as bribes for safety. Either way, the crocs have tenure. Then you hear it. Drilling. Hammering. The buzz of power tools. You round a bend and find a construction site sprawling across the river's edge. Massive concrete forms are being lowered into the water. Cranes swing like slow metal arms. This is part of the latest capital project. Another dam, a new bridge. It hardly matters. The river flows, people build, and somewhere in the middle both pretend to be in control. A young engineer in a hard hat gives you a brief tour. He talks of megawatts, flood mitigation, sustainable urban integration. He has a diagram on his tablet. It's very blue, very straight. You look at the screen and then at the river. They don't match. "Do you ever worry she'll push back, you ask?" And he chuckles. "She already does. We just budget for it." Later, an old fisherman tells you how things used to be before the projects came. You could drink from her with cupped hands, he says, shaking his head. Now, even the fish cough. It's not just water quality that's changed, it's rhythm. Migratory fish patterns have shifted, birds have moved upstream. The river's own language, its seasonal rises and falls, is harder to hear now beneath the hum of machines. But life, like water, adapts. You watch children using discarded concrete pipes as playground tunnels. A woman washes clothes beside a rusting water gauge. Someone's hung prayer flags on a bulldozer. The sacred and the engineered coexist awkwardly, like roommates who don't really talk but share a fridge. In the evenings, the workers gather by the water to bathe. Some light incense, others light cigarettes. A portable speaker plays old Bollywood songs. One man smears river mud on his forehead and says, "She still sees us, even if we stopped seeing her." You pass a field where saplings have been planted by the local government to offset construction. The sign reads, "Compensatory Afforestation." You look at the knee-high trees and then at a distant grove felled for the bridge. The math doesn't work, but the effort is something, and through it all, the crocodiles remain. Watching, drifting, living their slow, prehistoric lives. At night, you sleep in a shelter, half made of bamboo and half made of shipping containers. You hear the river gurgling beside you and the quiet, almost imperceptible clink of a crocodile tail slapping water in the dark. You think about the engineer, the fisherman, the temple priest, all of them trying to make sense of a river that can't be owned. Tamed, maybe. Shaped, sure. But owned? Never. The Narmada isn't against progress. She just insists you look her in the eye when you speak about it. The further west you walk, the more the river begins to stretch her limbs again. She's past the dams, the rebar, the retainer walls. Here she widens, gracefully, slowly, as though relaxing after centuries of tension. The current slackens, the air grows heavier with salt. You can smell the ocean even if you can't see it yet. But before she meets the sea, the Narmada has one last trick up her sleeve: duality. On your left, there's a solar farm. Hundreds of panels tilted to the sky like metal flowers. They shimmer under the sun, silent and efficient. Their power flows through cables that buzz faintly beneath your feet. Modern, renewable, forward-looking. On your right, a group of women performs Asti Visarjan, the final ritual for the dead, gently releasing ashes into the river, whispering prayers into the breeze. One woman weeps. Another folds her hands with quiet strength. Their grief becomes part of the river, as sacred as ever. This is the Narmada's final geography, a place where two worlds stand side by side, neither displacing the other. One of wires and engines, the other of chants and smoke. You don't have to choose between them. You're just asked to notice them both. You cross a footbridge that rattles with each step. Beneath it, children splash in the shallows with bits of plastic bottles and driftwood. They've built a tiny village, houses made from sandal boxes, temples from bottle caps. One child turns to you and says, "This is Narmada town. There's a dragon living here too." You nod, because of course there is. You sit on the bank and watch a small procession pass. It's a local saint's anniversary. Someone who once walked the entire parikrama barefoot while fasting. They say he died with river water in his throat and a smile on his lips. A teenage boy carrying a banner whispers, "He didn't walk. The river carried him." Historians still argue whether the stories about these saints are exaggerated or metaphorical. But here, the people don't care. The story is the truth. And that's enough. Just beyond a bend, you pass a factory. Quiet today, but you can smell the tang of dye in the soil. Nearby, a small shrine leans against its perimeter wall. A worker places a hibiscus flower on it every morning. To keep the river calm, he tells you. She gets offended sometimes. The idea that a river can be offended may sound strange, but not here. Here, geography has a personality, a temper, a memory, one you don't challenge, you negotiate. And the negotiations aren't always verbal. You spot a farmer squatting at the edge of a dried-up canal, tracing a stick in the mud. His field lies fallow behind him. "She changed her path last year," he says. "Stopped feeding this branch. I think she wants me to plant something else." "So what will you plant?" He shrugs. "Whatever she tells me." Later you see a cell tower disguised as a palm tree. It fools no one. But no one minds. It stands near a shrine dedicated to the river's left shoulder. Yes, her shoulder. According to one local sect, the river's body extends across the valley. Her spine is the main channel. Her limbs are the tributaries. Her shoulder, a blessed spot where dreams take root. You ask where the heart is. A woman overhearing you answers, that's up to her. She moves it. And just like that, you feel something shift. Not in the land, but in your perception of it. You've spent days, weeks, following the Narmada. And yet, now it feels like she's been following you, adjusting herself so that you'd notice the things you needed to. As twilight falls, you reach a rest stop. It's simple, just a clay platform and a tin roof. Someone's painted a mural across the back wall. The river as a woman with her arms wide, one holding a laptop, the other a prayer lamp. Below her, a quote in Devanagari script reads, "Don't ask if she is holy or modern. Ask if she's still listening." You sit, drink from your metal bottle, and watch the sky deepen from pink to plum to velvet blue. The wind off the water brings the scent of salt, jasmine and diesel. A perfect blend of yesterday, today and whatever comes next. And still, the Narmada flows, not away from anything, but toward everything. You can finally hear it now, faint at first, like a long exhale. The sea. It sighs at the horizon, pulling at the sky with each wave. The Narmada is almost home. After more than 1,000 kilometers, 1,000 stories, and 1,000 different versions of herself, she's ready to let go. But not quite yet. There's one final stretch before the ocean, a place where even the river seems confused. The water widens dramatically, but the banks still hold her close, reluctant to let her leave. Mangrove roots claw into the soft mud. Fishing nets drift like lazy spiderwebs in the current. And the people here? They've learned to live with in-between things. You stop in Baruch, the last major city before the river meets the sea. This place is ancient, truly ancient. The Greeks knew it as Barigaza. Arab traders once sailed here for textiles and spices. Even the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang wrote about it in the 7th century. If cities could dream, Baruch would dream in Sanskrit, Arabic, and the crackling sound of old boat hulls. You walk through the market where the river's smell mixes with chili powder, turmeric, fried fish, and incense. Everything here is transitional. The goods, the languages, the river itself. You pause at a centuries-old port wall, half-eaten by rust, and imagine ships docking here 1,000 years ago. The same current lapping their hulls now nudges your sandal. Locals call this stretch the Sangam, though technically it's not a meeting of rivers. It's the meeting of river and sea, fresh water and salt, belief and surrender. You follow a narrow walkway toward the delta. The land turns to marsh. Birds scatter as you pass. Your steps grow softer. You're walking not on dirt or stone, but on the silt of centuries. The very material the river gave back as she flowed. And then finally, there it is, the Arabian Sea. It doesn't roar. It doesn't sparkle. It simply waits. The Narmada reaches the sea like a friend returning home. No drama, no ceremony, just the gentle folding of fresh water into salt. And in that moment, you understand something fundamental. This was never about destinations. This was always about transformation. You sit near the edge, where the final waves of the river collapse gently into tide. A man nearby is drawing patterns in the sand with a stick, concentric rings like ripples or spirals. You ask what he's making. A map, he says, without looking up. To where? He smiles. To where we already are. You hear a motorbike sputter in the distance, a baby crying, a dog barking at the sea like it knows a secret, and in the background, the soft lapping of water against water, as the Narmada pours herself into something larger than herself. She doesn't vanish, she expands. Historians still argue whether the Narmada has always emptied here. Some say she once split into many mouths, others that she once curved farther north. But the sea doesn't mind. It takes what the river gives, no questions asked. You think back to that first trickle in Amarkantak, the sacred pool in the highlands. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it's also right here, in this moment. The same water. The same story. You realize now, you weren't just following the river. You were being shaped by her. Before you leave, you wade into the surf, just ankle deep, just long enough to let the water touch you one last time. It's colder than you expect. Salty, too. The sea doesn't try to imitate the river. It welcomes her, as she is. You watch a final offering float by, an old leaf bowl with a single flower still holding on. It spins once, twice, then vanishes. Not lost, just home. You linger a little longer at the shore than you expected. The sea is in no hurry, and now neither are you. The journey is complete, but the road still feels warm beneath your feet. Funny how walking this long doesn't just tire your body, it reshapes your thoughts. You sit beneath a leaning coconut tree, its trunk bent like a question mark. The tide rises slowly, curling around your toes, then easing back with a sigh. There's something in this moment, between land and water, day and night, that feels suspended, like time has paused to stretch. In the distance, fishing boats bob gently on the water, painted in blues and reds that have faded under years of sun. A few drift nets lie piled like sleeping creatures on the sand. Nearby, a group of boys is playing cricket with a stick and a plastic bottle. They shout, run, laugh. The sea ignores them. The river watches. Someone lights a fire. The smoke coils upward into a sky now scattered with stars. One of the boys walks down to the water with his hands cupped and drinks. Just one small sip. You know it's probably not the cleanest thing to do, but in this moment it looks like a sacrament. A woman in a green shawl sits beside you without a word. She nods at the horizon. She becomes someone else now, she says. You don't ask who she is. You both already know. And it's true. The river's shape is gone, absorbed by tides, pulled outward toward Oman, East Africa, the unknown. But her story doesn't end. It simply diffuses into mist, into memory, into mouths that will whisper it tomorrow. You lie back on the sand, arms behind your head, and stare up. The sky looks different now. Wider, maybe. Deeper. You wonder how many other rivers have walked their own parikramas, how many lives are built around bends and shallows, how many gods still sleep beneath surface tension. A crab scuttles past you, dragging a piece of seaweed like it owes him money. Somewhere behind you, a prayer bell rings, soft, persistent, final. The Narmada has reached the sea, and you've reached the edge of her story. But part of you is still upstream, sitting under neem trees, dodging crocodiles, tracing spirals into soft earth. And that part? It's not ready to leave, so you don't, not completely. You stay just long enough for the tide to wrap around your ankles like a goodbye. And now the wind slows. The stars pulse more gently. Your thoughts soften like riverbanks in monsoon. You breathe in, you exhale, and you begin to drift. You're still lying on that soft salt-washed sand, listening to the river merge with the sea merge with the stars, and your own thoughts gently quiet into nothingness. There's no more walking now, no more hills or temples or haunted mango groves, just rest. Let your limbs loosen. Let your eyes grow heavy. There is nothing left to explore tonight. The air is warm but carries a faint breeze, just enough to remind you that the world still turns, but you don't have to keep up with it right now. The sound of the water receding, then returning, is like a lullaby in another language, one you somehow understand. Imagine the river still flowing somewhere far upstream, even as you rest here at her end. Imagine the temples floating, the pilgrims walking, the crocodiles blinking slow, prehistoric blinks. The map is folding itself now. Your feet no longer needed, your eyes no longer open. Everything you passed is safe behind you, every name spoken, every step taken. So let the darkness hold you now. Let the rhythm of the current, slow and steady, cradle your breath. There's nothing left to reach for, nothing to finish. You're already home. Sleep. The river will carry the rest.